You're listening to London Greek Radio, and this programme has previously been broadcast, providing you with the opportunity to listen again to a show which you may have missed on LGR.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 2 of All About Autism. Did you know the number of children and adults diagnosed with autism is climbing? It's 1 in 21 now. It was 1 in 23 last year, so some leading autistic experts say that it's likely to be the case that there are as many autistic people as there are people with green eyes. I'm Helen Mikellides. Today I'll be talking to Sophia Christophi, who is autistic herself, and Ellie Kolatsi, a mother of an autistic son, who are both members of the charity, the London Autism Group charity, who were present on the last show. And I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Chris Papadopoulos, who is a lecturer in public health at the University of Bedfordshire, who's also one of the founders of the charity. Before I forget, I'd like to say thank you to our engineer, Tony Nelfitu. If you're an autistic person, child or adult, who have an autistic relative, or even if you don't, we'd love to hear from you, either during the show or afterwards, ahead of next month's show. Tell us what you think. We're here once a month, every first Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. Tonight we're focusing on diagnosis. So we're looking at some of the things that might make you think that your child is autistic, what to look for, the signs, and also anything diagnosis related. After the diagnosis, feelings about the diagnosis and who to talk to, and how the London Autism Group charity can help with diagnosis. If you'd like to call us, you can call us on 0208 346 3345. or email us at studio@lgr.co.uk with any questions. You can send us a text or WhatsApp message on 0737 661 1033, or you can find us on Facebook on London Greek Radio, or follow us on Twitter at LGR1033. I want to ask Ellie, first of all, who is a mum of, how old is your son?
He's 8.
He's 8.
Yeah.
And how long, when was he diagnosed?
He was diagnosed on his 4th birthday.
Okay. Can you tell me why you went for that, for a diagnosis in the first place?
Yeah, so we started to realise that there were certain situations where he would cup his ears, especially with loud noises. I don't know if anyone else felt that. But,
well, my son definitely did as well.
Yeah. So the loud noises was a signal. And also he used to get frustrated with using his words. So language was also difficult. So communication was difficult as well. I don't know if...
Yeah, 100%.
Would you say he was a late speaker?
Yes, definitely was, yeah. So we asked speech and language to make an assessment. So she came in and helped us with some visuals, and I think that was an important way in for us to communicate with him.
Same.
It's quite interesting that, with the late speaking, initially you just think they're having a tantrum because they're just late speakers and they're frustrated and they can't get their messages across, not because of any autism, but just, speech issues.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, when it comes to late verbal development, is that sometimes children that learn 2 languages or exposed to 2 languages or 3, there's research that says that those children can find each individual language just a little bit harder to process, and there's going to be a delay. So with us, we were wondering, are they being exposed to too much Greek, and is that maybe slowing down my son's verbal development? But in the end, it was pretty clear that he was severely, he had severe speech delay.
Okay.
But we were thinking, maybe it's his hearing. That's what we were thinking.
Same.
So we actually went first of all to an audiology appointment, and I was fairly certain it was going to come back with the audiology saying, your son unfortunately has a hearing issue. Yeah. But then when I spoke to him, it was as if, honestly speaking, it was as if he couldn't hear me. But in the end, what I've realised, perhaps I wasn't sort of speaking to him in the way that worked for him. But the audiologist came back and said, no, he's, did a thorough test and said he's absolutely fine. And I had mixed feelings at that point, because I was thinking, well, what's going on there?
What is it then?
Yeah. And so, that was part of our journey as well, for sure.
That is one of the actual textbook signs of all, early autism characteristics. According to Speech Dude on Instagram, I picked up a couple of little nuggets here, and one of the signs is lack of or decreased response to his or her name being called, especially if you've called it a few times and there's no response.
Yeah. What is that the same? Does that resonate with you as well, Helen, with your son?
Definitely. Well, when he was, I mean, we're talking about as a baby. You know, I've never been around children before until I'd had one of my own. But so I didn't know the developmental milestones and when they were supposed to be doing what. You know, so my mum picked up on it. She said, "Oh, he doesn't respond when you call him," and I just said, "Oh, well, he's watching, you know, Tinky Winky or whatever it's on TV, you know, and he's concentrating, so he's not interested." So I just ignored that one.
Yeah. So similar to me. I mean, the other thing is for us, beyond the speech, was just the general kind of social interactions. That was the other thing for us. That was the big sort of flag for us, in that, you know, he just struggled in quite crowded, noisy environments with other children. He didn't want to be in the same space with a lot of other children at loud parties, you know, and he'd want to just be on his own in a quiet environment,
or with an adult.
Or with an adult, in a more structured, calmer, you know, less manic place. And then when he was with children in smaller groups, you know, he was able to interact, but again, it was a little different to what you'd perhaps expect from your child, just in terms of it was more sort of self-centered rather than totally interactive, let's say. But that's not to say that he can't be totally interactive. He indeed can, and he could. It's just the environment at the time, our kind of understanding of it. That was what I saw, and that's what I felt.
He's not comfortable when he's overwhelmed. Is that how you felt, Sophia?
Yeah, I was similar in terms of interacting with people, but growing up, my speech development was actually the opposite. So I spoke really early on. I was fluent in 2 languages from a young age. I loved reading letters, words. So it wasn't the verbal communication that I struggled with, more sort of understanding social situations and to be able to communicate with people my own age. So I was much better off either on my own, or I preferred adult company and listening to adults talking to each other. But my own age group, there was a definite sort of block in being able to interact with people easily.
What do you like with small talk?
Small talk. I don't really like small talk. I don't really see the point of it. But yeah, I realise now as I'm older that's an important skill to have, and it's just something that I've sort of learnt to do rather than it coming intuitively.
Yeah, small talk is an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you think about it, what is the point of small talk beyond just facilitating a little bit of social interaction? I mean, to a lot of autistic people that we come across in the charity, they say the same thing as you, Sophia, that they just think, well, it's pointless, it's almost deceitful, you know. Autistic people are famed often for their honesty and truthfulness, aren't they? But I think your story, though, Sophia, it does highlight an important point, that everybody is different. You know, of course, there are going to be common characteristics and traits that you hear about and you might see, but you know, each individual autistic person does experience things and does come off differently, particularly across different genders. I think that's something that a lot of research shows as well, and I think that contributes to a little bit of the late diagnosis that we see often with girls, in that they are a little bit more verbally capable than boys often. They're better able to mask than boys, and so they kind of go under the radar a little bit. So it's you know,
the traits can be a bit more subtle as well. So like as a child, I was really interested in books, and that wasn't really seen as unusual, because when you go to school, you're learning to read, and all children go through a stage of being into books. But for me, it was like almost an obsession with books. I suppose if it was something that was a bit more unusual, then it might have been picked up on sooner, but it was something that was quite ordinary. Yeah.
But were you sort of really, obsessed and focused with those books because that was your coping mechanism? Was that a sort of way of distressing and separating yourself from the madness of the world.
Yeah, and that's just what I enjoyed doing. And when you're reading, nobody wants to talk to you. So
yeah, that's true as well, isn't it?
That's a good one.
Ideally, unless you know,
I like that.
unless you're some people,
With girls, I think it's easier for them to mask the symptoms, I should say, the characteristics of autism, because they can mask better. But you know, age 3 is the typical age of diagnosis, because at the age of 3, enough of the neuropsychology of the child has developed that a firm diagnosis can be made, and they've got interests in particular things, or a preferred toy or object. We mentioned the decreased response to the name. You can add repeated body movements to that: kicking, finger flapping, finger flicking, flapping, body tightening, stimming, lining up items. My son did that at nursery.
My son did that. Lining up. He would obsessively line things up. So if you gave him a bunch of toy cars, you'd perhaps expect neurotypical child or whoever to play with those cars,
to wheel them
creatively,
along.
right, and to sort of interact with you in their joined up world. But with my son, instead, what he would do would line them up. There was no real creative play, rather he'd see them for specific objects and he'd kind of connect them on a object level rather than on a creative level. And the other thing that comes to mind with my son is that he would watch a program, right, and he wouldn't really get it. So he'd watch a cartoon or whatever, right, and he wouldn't really he didn't really understand what he was watching. But what he really enjoyed was waiting for the credits to roll up.
The adverts,
the post movie credits, whatever it was, and he would love the contrast between the black background and the white writing, and the way the writing would like fluidly move upwards. And so he'd go and stand in front of the television and he'd just watch very, very closely the credits just scroll up. And it's things like that that make you think, okay, he's processing in a different way perhaps to most other children.
So I'm the opposite. So my son never lined up anything, and he would love his buses, so he would go creatively. He would make the noise, so he would like to imitate the sounds and pretend he's going on journeys. But can I just come back to what you said about stimming? Could you just explain a bit more about that, Chris?
Yeah, so stimming is a really important thing to know about. So as Helen indicated, you might see a child, or whoever it is, an autistic person, doesn't have to be a child of course, engaging in what's called, it could look repetitive movements.
Head shaking, spinning, rocking back and forth, fingers splaying.
Right, yeah, flapping or rocking. And the reason for that is because they are stimming, they are seeking sensory input, and they're doing that in order to reduce anxiety and to cope.
And self-regulate.
So it's really, really important, as I'm sure Sophia will hopefully agree with, that you don't interfere with that, or you don't sort of remove that. And I think that one of the misconceptions is that, that's bad, that's a problem because it looks wrong. Yeah. But if you remove it, then you're really hurting the child, aren't you?
You're taking away a coping strategy. And I think it's important to say that people that are not autistic stim too, just maybe in a more subtle way. So you might have someone that's always bouncing their leg or clicking on the top of a pen. That's similar to stimming. It's that self-regulation. It's just that with autistic people, some stims can be much more obvious, much more pronounced, look different. But I think everybody does these sort of self-soothing actions or things that make them feel better. But stimming is an important regulation tool for
it's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we mustn't stigmatise it. We've got to accept it, and actually leverage it, I think.
Yeah, my son made me shut the window today when we were driving home because he was doing some sort of scream and he didn't want anyone to hear. He said, you can open, I'm very hot, but you can open the window when I'm done self-regulated. So he knows what he's doing, and at least he can vocalise it. But going back to... this is very interesting. My godson is actually autistic too, and he's 4 now. And his mum was telling me that he came home from when he was 2 years old. He came home and he got his letters because he'd obviously been sitting in the car, and he came home and grabbed all his letters at the age of 2 and spelt out Peugeot.
Wow.
Who knows how to spell Peugeot?
Nobody
knows how to spell,
isn't it?
exactly. So So there's some really, really kind of interesting things like that. There's also sensitivity to sound as well, as we spoke about.
Sensory, the sensory experiences, the sensory processing differences are often the biggest clue.
Yeah.
You know, if you look, if you're wondering if your child or if you are autistic yourself. So if you are, experiencing, if you're somebody that really enjoys or needs a lot of sensory input, perhaps more than the typical person, or you can't cope with it and you have to wear ear defenders, or you just have to withdraw, from a very loud, bright room, then, that's an indicator that maybe your sensory processing is different. Not worse, but different. Yeah. I mean, do you relate to that, Sophia?
Yeah, I would say I'm more on the sensory sort of sensitive side. I don't really seek stimulation, but I don't like too much noise or certain textures of clothing, even food. So I have all my food separate on a plate because I don't like the mixture of the different textures. So for me, it's like the reduction in sensory stimulation is better. So when I used to go into school and it used to be sort of really loud, really bright, I used to look around and think, how are these people just coping with this chaos? But, I didn't know I was autistic at the time, so...
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the reasons why autistic children struggle so much, because the school environment isn't really necessarily, catered for their particular sensory needs or their particular... the way they particularly process the world. So, instead it's just one big mix, isn't it? A school, and the child has to basically develop their own coping mechanisms unless they're fortunate enough to have access to good support. And this is one of the reasons why we're talking about diagnosis today, is because through a diagnosis, a formal diagnosis, you can, it's still a bit of a lottery, but you can, in theory, and often in practice, get some good support in the school. So...
Going over all the characteristics of autism, we're going to now talk about the diagnosis process and what to do once you've thought you need to get a diagnosis. Chris?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing would be to, don't fear the process. I mean, obviously it can be challenging and it can be quite long. Unfortunately, there are long waiting times. But if in your gut you feel that your child or yourself or someone that you know who's close to you is autistic, if it's in your gut, if you feel it, go for it. Don't let any stigma or kind of any fear of the label affect you. Unfortunately, we have heard that in the charity. We do get people telling us that they would have got the diagnosis for their child a lot earlier had they, listened to their gut and not been so scared about the kind of societal reaction or the community reaction to getting the diagnosis. Or
isolation.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say the first thing is, go for it if you feel it. Generally, okay, it could start at different places, the beginning of the process. Typically, what usually happens is you might go to the GP. So you often, a lot of people will go to the GP and say, look, my child has got speech delay, or I'm for whatever reason thinking I might be autistic, and you have a conversation with your GP, and your GP they may then, hopefully, if they're a good GP, and they listen to you and they value what you're saying, because obviously don't often get that. You may not necessarily get that, but if they're a good GP, then they'll refer you for the diagnostic, the full diagnostic process. That will vary from local authority to local authority, but it's always going to be multidisciplinary, the actual process itself. So once you get the referral, there'll be different experts, from different backgrounds coming together and giving their kind of overall opinion. And then what will happen is those opinions get collated and put together, and the child or yourself or whoever it is gets the diagnosis or doesn't get the diagnosis. But it can take a long time. You may initially encounter a professional that doesn't give you the time all day, so you might need to sort of fight through that a bit. I don't know if that relates to you, if that resonates to you, Sophia.
I think my experience was slightly different because I'd never suspected autism for myself, and nor had my mum or anyone in my family. It was actually the deputy head teacher at my school who, after struggling for quite some time, had suggested that I might be autistic. He'd worked with a lot of autistic people and had noticed the similarities between me and them. And he suggested we go to the GP, which is what we did with his support. So this was when I was 16, so 10 years ago. And I was referred to CAMHS, and I was seen 3 months later, which was really lucky because the waiting lists now are very long. And from CAMHS, I was sent to an autism specialist, and then I got my diagnosis the following year.
CAMHS is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. Yeah. Like I said, waiting times can be very long. Unfortunately, you might end up waiting anything between, if you're lucky, 12 months, or maybe 2 years or more potentially, because the system isn't really in place at the moment to cope with the amount of diagnoses that are coming through the door at the moment. Ellie, what would you say?
So we had we had input from speech and language, so we were trying to figure out what was going on. So there was speech and language, there was occupational therapy involved, and then he was initially assessed by a paediatrician, which made the diagnosis. But as Chris said, do not give up. If one person says something and you've still got that gut instinct, persevere. Perseverance is what you need, and patience. Keep knocking on those doors, keep asking also around, and it's those conversations. Do not be isolated, or don't fear and have that stigma attached that, I can't talk about it, because once you start opening up, you'll be surprised about how many conversations and how many people are struggling. So it's really important that you get out there and you persevere with it. That's really what my kind of message is.
Yeah, 100%.
And if you need some help, you can go to the London Autism Group charity Facebook page, the website as well. But the Facebook page has got so much interaction between parents and, I think you've got professionals on there as well. That you've got over. I went on it the other day. It's over 3,500 members.
Yeah, we've got 3,500 people. Autistics, adults and parents of autistic children, autistic parents, and professionals, as you said. The nice thing about us is that you don't need a diagnosis to access our support. So if you are just interested even in autism, you're welcome. Or if you think you might be autistic or your child might be autistic, you're welcome. Come and get some advice, ask the community, and that's a really nice way of feeling, less lonely and less isolated. The other thing I'd like to say about this is that you may find yourself in a similar position to what I found myself in, which was we were getting the diagnosis. We were at the last stage sitting with the consultant paediatrician, and the paediatrician told us, yes, we agree that your child is autistic. But then the paediatrician told us, it sort of framed it in a very negative way, very, very, very negative, as if to say, what were you thinking having a child? What, don't you know it's hereditary because, your first child was autistic? And I'm referring now to my experience with my third child. And so beware of that. You're not necessarily going to come across the right kinds of professionals. Yes, they might score the child as autistic because they're using diagnostic instruments, but you might unfortunately come across difficult conversations. Remember, being autistic is not a bad thing. It's all about diversity. It's about neurodiversity. I don't know if you want to say anything to that, Sophia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people should be afraid to sometimes challenge the professionals, because I think a lot of times they hold their own misconceptions, which can then be reflected, and then people are afraid of being labelled, and what's that label going to mean for the rest of their life. But finding out that you're autistic can be a really positive part of your identity, and if the diagnostic process was slightly different, ideally it would also focus on the strengths that autistic people have, rather than the very one-sided, these are all the things that you're not doing that neurotypical people do.
Yeah, and that's something you unfortunately experienced, isn't it, Sophia? When you were telling us recently you were having a look at your diagnostic report for yourself, and it was quite... in
preparation for this show I decided to read back over my diagnostic report, which wasn't a pleasant experience. But it basically said things like, I have little ability to appreciate humour, I should consider social skills training, I'd expressed an interest in studying psychology, and I was told that wouldn't be compatible with my way of thinking and that I should just stick to my strengths. But now I'm doing a PhD in psychology.
And you're one of the funniest people I know, by the way, as well.
Yeah. She is really funny. I was talking to her earlier. She's really, really funny. Every week I'd see you in a different light. You're getting funnier and funnier every week. Now she's starting to let go as well.
And then at the end of the appointment, when they came out and said, "Oh, you're autistic," they gave us a packet of leaflets and discharged us, and that was it.
Yeah, that's the other thing, don't necessarily expect that they're going to sort of hold your hand and support you after the diagnosis. You're on your own, unfortunately, in many respects, and there's further battles to fight. But they're important. It's important, as Ellie said, to persevere, fight the battles, advocate for yourself, advocate for your child, and you will get the benefits. Better to go down that road than the road where you don't get any support and you're more isolated and
yeah, and
anxious.
also to seek out information that's maybe been written by autistic people. So that there's a lot of autistic people now that blog or go onto YouTube. I think sometimes the leaflets that you might get sent home with will be very generic, very medical. It's not really going to give you an insight into the autistic experience, but there's plenty of resources online written by people that have the lived experience that you probably will find more relatable, more comforting.
Yeah, which is, again, a good reason to come to our charity, because we are autistic-led. We've got loads of autistic people in our Facebook group, and we can also connect you with autistic people on a one-to-one basis and get some advice, get some support. So absolutely agree.
And there's support for siblings as well. Support for everyone, really.
Yeah, because, everybody's part of the same community. Siblings often get overlooked, unfortunately. They can be exposed to quite a confusing situation in the family household, and they can sometimes get overlooked themselves. A lot of the attention might be focused on the autistic sibling, and the non-autistic sibling gets a little bit overlooked. So they're a bit vulnerable as well. So, we're all in it together. Why not just help each other, and that's what it's all about.
I mean, we're lucky these days. There's a lot of support out there. It's much better than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We're actually quite lucky. And people who do get a diagnosis find, some people go through different emotions. Some people, grieve when they hear their child has been diagnosed with autism. But, on the other hand, they're also relieved. It's a weight off their shoulders when you've got a diagnosis and that there is a reason for all the things that have been going on, and then you can get the right support, because with the right support you can bring out the best in your child. And some of these children go on to grow up and do great things in the world. Look at Silicon Valley. There are more, I think most of the autistic people in America live around Silicon Valley because they've got jobs in industry, engineering.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, if you know you're autistic, right? If you have the opportunity to get the diagnosis and you identify as autistic, then you can go on that journey and discover who you are, what your strengths are, accept them, and then leverage them, and then apply for the jobs, and go for the careers that work for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There'll be less confusion about what it is that makes you and what make you happy.
yeah.
But if you don't go on that journey, it's more muddly and more confusing. You might end up being less happy
and doing what you think you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Great point.
And I think prior to diagnosis, that's how I felt. I felt a bit like I was failing at being a person, a typical person. But then when I found out that I'm autistic, I realised, well, I'm just a perfectly normal autistic person. But I was measuring myself against neurotypical standards, and it's a comparison that just doesn't work. If your brain's wired differently, then of course you're going to find those sorts of situations difficult, and it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It's just different.
Okay, so back to the diagnosis. Diagnosis may not solve all the problems. There are lots of emotions that you go through after hearing getting the diagnosis on your child, or on yourself. All children on the autism spectrum are entitled to an assessment of their needs. This is by social services, because they may be entitled to certain things, home help or respite care, depending on their needs. You can get disability benefits. You can get into the community care service, but you can contact the National Autistic Society for more details on that. They've got a pack that they send out. But the London Autism Group charity also have details on these things, don't they?
Yeah, we do. We'll, like I said, we'll help you through the process afterwards, during and afterwards, if you need support. I think, though, it's important to say that there are a lot of benefits, if you go down a diagnosis road, because it will, of course, in a way validate, you know, the fact that you are autistic or your child is autistic. You know, that validation is quite a powerful thing. You often need it, and it's nice to have. But also it opens some doors to support, as you said, Helen. You know, you can get disability living allowance if you fight for it and try for it. You know, and also, of course, you could get the EHCP situation, so the plan, which is the educational health and care plan. And that essentially means that the local authorities will release some money to give to the school in order to meet the needs of the specific educational, health and social needs that your child has. So your child, in theory, should get more tailored, more comprehensive, more higher quality support. And all of that's great. All of that is great. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of EHCPs. But the point I want to make is that a lot of people choose not to get a diagnosis, a lot of autistic people, because a lot of autistic people think, well, I know I'm autistic. I don't need that additional validation. I don't need any kind of additional services. Now? You know, if I identify as autistic, that's enough. And we also really admire and accept that as well. You know, we think that's a great thing. If you want to make that choice, self-identification is just as powerful, you know. And again, in our charity, we will, take you in open arms if you self-identify as autistic without a diagnosis. So I just wanted to make that point that, you know, you don't need a diagnosis to identify as autistic. You know, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Sophia.
Well, if you let me just butt in there, because we haven't spoken about do you know what we haven't spoken about? The Greek Community Centre and the cafe.
Right,
we're going to run out of time.
Yeah,
Come on, tell us about that.
All right, so thank you, Helen, thank you. So this is an important point. The London Autism Group charity now has a Greek and Greek Cypriot wing of the charity, which is co-led by Ellie and Sophia here. And we have put together the first ever Greek-focused community drop-in cafe. It's going to be monthly at the Cypriot Community Centre in Wood Green, and it will be happening every last Saturday at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And all you have to do, there's no pre-registration. All you want to, if you have any interest in autism, you're autistic yourself, or you want to find out more, whatever it is, come down, you'll meet all of us, and we'll give you support, we'll connect you to other people, and you'll just feel included and less isolated. So again, that is the last Saturday of every month, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. I just want to say that the starting date is the 29th of October, so the very first one of these will be on the 29th of October, so that's soon, and we're going to have a nice launch ceremony at 10:45 a.m. So if you want to come for the launch ceremony, 10:45 a.m. Otherwise, it's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. every month, last Saturday of the month, and we'll have that information on our website as well.
Well, congratulations for finally launching that. You've been working on that for a while, haven't you?
Yeah, it's not easy bringing these things together. Yeah, finding the venue and getting the people and whatnot. But it's important to have that space, for the community.
That's lovely.
I just wanted to say a bit more about the EHCPs, really, the education healthcare plans. They are essential, really, to have, especially when your child is in school, because it brings together what their needs are, and it enables the school to offer perhaps speech and language, OT. Sometimes you get it, not always. I don't know, Helen, if you have any experience about it.
Don't ask me about that story. But, we've only got 8 minutes left. I can go on and on about that one. Yes, so an EHCP, as we discussed, is extra funding from the local borough. Once you get the diagnosis, sometimes you will get an EHCP, sometimes you won't. It depends. But most of the times you would. They're quite good like that. But it's whether the school, serves you. And, we could do a whole programme about EHCPs, couldn't we? Yeah. And funding on how. I'm struggling at the moment and going through a case. I might have to take my local authority to tribunal because they're not serving my son properly. It's not, I've had to pull him out of school because the school were misusing their EHCP. But you have actually got a right there's an EHCP code of practice online that you can read, and it's 292 pages long. But you actually can use, I can't remember what it's called, it's something to do with costings. It's something called costing something or other. But you actually have a right to ask the school what they're spending the money on. They'll always try to make you not ask those questions. But you have got a right. Once you've got your EHCP, it's your EHCP for your child. It shouldn't be used anywhere else.
When they work, they are really helpful and beneficial. And that's the other thing, where sometimes you do have to fight for it and build up an evidence. So if you feel that your son or daughter or young person is perhaps struggling or finding something challenging, you always have to evidence and document it. And that's what you bring forward your case for an EHCP. So it's really important that you do that.
And it's true that an EHCP doesn't just go up to 16 or 18. Is it 25 years old?
Yeah, it is,
so it'll go to university as well.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
And Sophia, you were saying there wasn't any EHCPs back in your day, was there?
No, I didn't have any EHCP at school. But then, luckily, as a result of the diagnosis, I did have much more support with my transition from school to university. Them being aware that I was autistic meant that I'd done lots of practice trips to the university, met all the team that would have been teaching me all in advance of me actually going there, because although school was a challenging experience, it was also the place that I was most familiar with. So my anxiety around leaving school was really high. So that was, I maybe didn't realise how important that diagnosis was when I got it age 16 until those transition periods came along. And now I think, would I have managed the transition to university if I didn't know I was autistic, if there wasn't that support, if I was expected to just go and figure it out? I'm not sure I would have managed it as well as I did had I not been diagnosed.
And transitions are a bit of a pain point sometimes for autistic people, particularly, the transitioning from one state, of play that they understand to another. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of confusion.
Leaving familiarity.
Familiarity. Yeah. So that those phases really do need can need a lot of support.
Yeah, and it can be why a lot of autistic people insist on having things the same, sort of quite comfortable in their routines, because that's where our anxiety is at its lowest. So we notice small transitions just from leaving the house is a transition. Things that most people might just get up and do. Everything's a change to us, and we pick up on all these small changes. So that's why our stimming, our routines, repetitive behaviours can all be coping mechanisms.
I've got to learn a lot from you, because my son's like that. He doesn't like to leave the house. So, do we have anything to say?
No. I just want to, remind everybody about our community cafe. Please do come down if you can. The 29th of October is the first one. 10:45 a.m. we'll be having our launch, and 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. will be the actual cafe, and you'll get to meet people, connect, have a drink on us, and have a hopefully a good time.
Now, has this been advertised anywhere? Because I do believe it's on the LGR website. Is it on the LGR website? If it's not, it's going to be. We'll make sure that it goes on.
Yeah, it's on the Twitter account for LGR, and we're beginning to advertise now,
Okay, that's great. So come down on the 29th of October, on the Saturday at 10:45 for the launch. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to hear your stories and your journeys. And just take part and just be part of our community. And we're really looking forward to meeting you. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who came today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Chris,
for having us.
Sophia,
Thank you.
Ellie.
See you next time.
Yeah, see you next month. And we'll be talking about, we haven't announced the subject yet, have we?
No, but shortly we will figure it out.
Shortly yes. We'll announce it then. So thank you for listening.
You're listening to London Greek Radio, and the programme you just heard had previously been broadcast, providing you with the opportunity to listen again to a show which you may have missed on LGR.